Hello everyone. In this video, we discuss about the chapter Reproduction in Organisms, which is in class 12 CBSE syllabus, and here in this video we talk part 4 or sexual reproduction, and this is like an introduction to the further chapters, like you will study flowering in plants and also human reproduction. So this will basically focus on introducing to sexual reproduction. Okay. So what is sexual reproduction? So it involves fusion of male and female gametes by the process of fertilization. And we all know, like, when male and female gametes in humans, the male gamete is sperm, in females the gamete is egg, and when it fuses it forms a zygote, and sexual reproduction not only just takes place in humans, so you really have to understand this, it takes place in also other organisms. So, this process of fertilization results in offspring that are not identical to the parents or to themselves, They are similar but not identical, In the last part, we discussed about the asexual reproduction and we saw like fission and, like the daughter products are exactly copies and they are called as clones. However, in sexual reproduction, the offsprings are not identical to the parents or also to themselves, So when male and female gametes are produced from male and female parents respectively, then it is called as unisexual reproduction. So it sounds confusing, but it is very easy, When the male gametes are produced from male parent and when the female gamete is produced from the female parent, then it is called as unisexual reproduction. And for example, in man, like the man produces sperms and the women will produce the eggs. So therefore it is unisexual reproduction, and similarly happens in the cow and many other organisms. So why we talk about unisexual reproduction? Because of course there is something called as bisexual reproduction that exists. So when both male and female gametes are produced from the same individual, then it is called as bisexual reproduction, So both male and female gametes are produced from the same individual. So then it is called as bisexual reproduction. For example, earthworm and tapeworm. So within the same organism, there will be one male and one female gamete that will be produced, and this is called as bisexual reproduction. So the difference between unisexual and bisexual reproduction is that in unisexual reproduction we have a man that produces male gametes and we have a woman that produces the female gametes, However, in bisexual reproduction, the same organism will produce both the gametes. So, phases in organism's life. We also touched upon this topic briefly in the introduction part of this chapter, that was part 1. So, there are 3 phases in organism's life: the juvenile phase, the reproductive phase, and the old phase. And the 4th phase is like the death, So, that is death. That is not a phase, that is an event that takes place. So, the juvenile phase are also known as the vegetative phase, So, all organisms have to reach a certain phase of growth and maturity in their life before they can reproduce sexually, And this period or this growth period is known as the juvenile phase, or in plants it is known as the vegetative phase. And its duration will vary in different organisms depending on the complexity or whatever reasons, from organism to organism, the duration of the juvenile phase or the vegetative phase in plant changes. And again, as we discussed before in part 1 introduction of this chapter, that all organisms have to reach a certain phase of growth and maturity, before they can reproduce sexually. And this is basically the time period during which their sexual organs will also grow. Okay. And the next phase is the reproductive phase. So when the organisms start reproducing in their life cycle, then this is known as the reproductive phase. Very easy as it sounds. So there are plants, so plants can be, of different types. So they can be biennial plants, annual plants, and also perennial plants. So plants like biennial and annual type show clear-cut vegetative phase, that is also called as juvenile phase in other organisms except for plants, reproductive phase and senescence phase, so biennial and annual plants. But perennial plants, it is very difficult to clearly define these phases. So what are biennial plants or what are annual plants, So annual basically means like in 1 year, So annual plants are the type of plants that have a full life cycle, that is from seed to seed cycle in at most 1 year, So it will germinate, bloom and die that year. So it will have its vegetative, reproductive, senescence phase in 1 year and it will die in that year, And then there will be like some annual plants that will germinate in autumn, survive through winter, bloom through next spring, But in total, their whole lifespan will be 1 year. So for annual type of plants, the lifespan is 1 year. So similarly, like it's annual, it's biennial, 2 years. So here the lifespan is 2 years. So a biennial plant takes 2 years to complete its whole life cycle of vegetative, reproductive and senescence phase. It will germinate, grow and survive, let's say it will survive through one winter. And second year, it will grow even more than it grew in the first year, bloom and then it will ultimately die. So there is this difference that in annual, the whole cycle takes place in 1 year. However, in biennial plants, it takes 2 years and in the second year, generally, it will bloom much more than the first year. So there is a clear-cut vegetative, reproductive and senescence phase in both biennial and annual type of plants. However, in perennial plants, the plants that are growing more than 2 years, that grow for a lot of years. Therefore, it is very difficult to clearly define these phases, because they live for so many years, so it gets difficult. So it's very important to know like what are biennial plants, what are annual plants and what are perennial. And as clearly it sounds, annual is generally 1, biennial is 2 years. So they have a lifespan of 1 year and they have a lifespan of 2 years, and perennial have lifespan of more than 2 years. Okay. So then in animals, the juvenile phase is followed by morphological and physiological changes, prior to active reproductive behavior. So let's say, for example, we take the easiest example always, the humans, because we know each other. So what happens, like when you are growing, when you are in your juvenile phase, let's say for men, the voice really changes. So there are also morphological changes and physiological changes. Also how you look sometimes changes. So the juvenile phase is followed by morphological and physiological changes prior to active reproductive behavior. Before you have completely gained your reproductive behavior, there will be a lot of changes in the body. Okay, then next we talk about birds, first about plants, animals, then we talk about birds. So birds living in nature, they lay eggs seasonally. So some will lay eggs in winter, some will lay eggs in summer. Whereas the birds in captivity. So captivity is basically, the birds that are used for commercial purposes and they are put in cages, etc. They lay eggs throughout the year. In humans, placental females show changes in ovaries, accessory reproductive ducts and hormones during the reproductive phase. There are a lot of changes that take place in humans, and in subsequent chapters of this reproduction unit you will learn about, you will learn a lot about flowering in plants, and you will also learn a lot about human reproduction. But for now it is important for you to know that placental females. Why placental females? Because the females, we have a development of placenta, when we become pregnant, and it shows changes in ovaries, accessory reproductive ducts and hormones, during the reproductive phase. Okay. Next is oestrus cycle. Oestrus cycle is just the term for cyclic changes during the reproductive phase in non-primate mammals, and which are the non-primate mammals? Cows, sheep, deers, dogs, tigers, etc. So oestrus cycle is just like a term for cyclic changes, like the menstrual cycle in humans. Therefore, oestrus cycle is in non-primate mammals. So again, like while such changes in the primates is called as the menstrual cycle. For example, humans, apes, monkeys, etc. So humans, apes, monkeys are much more advanced and therefore they come under the category of primates, and non-primates is cow, sheep, deer, dog, tiger, etc. So you have to remember that the oestrus cycle is in non-primates, which is similar to menstrual cycle in primates. This is important. Then it is senescence or the old phase, and in this phase there is again progressive deterioration in the body and rate of metabolism that ultimately leads to death. And you must know the difference between senescence and aging, which we discussed in the part 1. Okay. Then this is also very important, we also touched upon this in introduction, difference between sexual and asexual reproduction. So asexual reproduction produces genetically similar individuals which may not be able to survive, if the conditions are unfavorable for that genetic makeup. So asexual reproduction, what happens, there is one parent plant and then it produces like one parent organism and then it produces, multiple like daughter organisms, it can be many, it can be 2 daughter organism if it is binary fission, or it can be multiple organisms. However, they have genetically similar constitution and they might not be able to survive in unfavorable conditions if this genetic composition, is not good. If their genetic composition cannot withstand, let's say, high temperature or freezing temperatures, then they will not be able to survive. On the other hand, sexually reproducing organisms exhibit genetic variability, that helps them to tide over unfavorable conditions and will reproduce. So sexually reproducing organism, because there is exchange of this genetic material and there is genetic variability, and generally genetic variability, favors like that, okay, the organism can really survive under the unfavorable conditions and will be able to reproduce. So other differences, asexual reproduction is rapid, and increase the population by adding individuals in a very short duration of time. So this is advantageous to some extent as it rules out the potential competitors and increases the population of a successful genotype. So, we saw like various modes of asexual reproduction in the previous part of this chapter, and one of them was multiple fission. So, a large number of individuals can be produced, in a very short duration of time. And this is advantageous as it rules out potential competitors, and increases the population of successful genotype. On the contrary, sexual reproduction is slow, it is complex and it is elaborate. Like first both the gametes will meet, and then it will take a while till the embryo develops and till the next generation comes out. So, these are the differences between asexual and sexual reproduction, which you definitely should know. And then it is events in sexual reproduction, and they can be grouped into 3 distinct stages, that is pre-fertilization events, fertilization events and post-fertilization events. So 3, like pre-fertilization events are basically the events that takes place, like which includes formation of the gametes. Fertilization will be when both the gametes meet, and post-fertilization will what happens after the gametes have met each other, and we will have a closer look at all these 3 distinct events in the next part of this chapter, So in this part we really saw like an overall introduction of sexual reproduction. Thank you for watching the video.